Hello guys, we've just had the LEC season finals play out, G2 coming out on top as everybody expected, but now we know the seeding and which team from each major region is actually going to be attending Worlds. For the purpose of this, I'm treating the Worlds qualifier series between BDS and Golden Guardians as Worlds. But yeah, I'm going to be making a tier list on the teams from the major regions attending Worlds. One thing you might notice is that there's like black spots here. That's just because these teams have black logos, but you'll see when I replace them, you'll actually see the logo once they're on the list. Before I get into it, I just want to do a little bit of explanation onto my tiers themselves. So here's the S tier. This is the tournament favorites. I'm fully expecting teams in the S tier to win Worlds. It will be a surprise if a team wins Worlds that is not in S tier. Next up, we have A tier. These are like contenders to win Worlds. They're not the favorites, but if an S tier team doesn't win it, which is what's expected, the A tier teams, I'm pretty sure it will be an A tier team that will win. If it's not an S tier, of course. B tier, these are teams that I don't think quite have that shot at winning Worlds, but their expectation should be to make it past the Swiss stage. They're in contention for maybe a semis, maybe a quarters, these sort of level of teams. Then C tier are the teams that I don't expect to make it out of the Swiss stage. And then F tier are just the worst of the teams that I think will just maybe go like lose all of their games in the Swiss stage, depending on matchup. Might drop straight out of the tournament. So yeah, and then I've got one final tier, of course, the Dark Horse tier. When I get to this team, I'll explain why they're my dark horse. I think they have the potential to win it all. I'll go into that and I'll talk about why, but I'll also talk about what tier I would actually put them in if I wasn't putting them in the dark horse tier. So we're starting out with the LEC. I think this is the order of seeding. It might be that Fnatic and Mad are swapped based on championship points. I'm not entirely sure how it works because they have a different format to every other region. But regardless, the order that I place them on the list doesn't really matter. So the fourth seed, BDS, they're going to sit at the bottom of my C tier. I think they should not be expecting to make it out of Swiss. I think there's too many teams that are better than them for them to be able to do that. But what they do have going for them is a good level of volatility, and this mostly comes from Adam in the top lane. I think any teams with weak top laners, Adam is really good at playing against top laners that are weaker than him. He brings out the Olaf, he brings out the Darius, sometimes a Renekton, and he has a tendency to just smash weaker players. But he's not great at playing against players that are better than him. We also have Sheo Nook. I think they've been a lot weaker later in the season than they were at the start, although I think it's slightly exaggerated. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that Fnatic with their roster changes have leveled up. Mad they leveled up and ended up beating BDS and going to MSI, but after that they went down again and now they're sort of back on an upswing. G2, of course, have been like really strong all year and they've just been consistently getting better. So I think it's that the competition has leveled up more, well, not more so than BDS have dropped off, but I think it's a combination of both. I don't think it's just that BDS have dropped off, which is what a lot of people are saying. So yeah, bottom of C tier for BDS. Next we've got the Mad Lions. Now, I think they're better than BDS. I think they're considerably better than BDS, actually. I think BDS are like definitively the weakest team that the LEC are sending, and that's obviously the reason that they're going to the season qualifier or the Worlds qualifying series, whatever it's called. It's a very strange format this year, but yeah. Mad, I think, have looked a lot better, especially in the season finals. Mad looked pretty solid. Obviously not reaching the level of G2, but as a spoiler, I'm going to put Fnatic just above them. I think these two teams are very, very close in terms of their skill level. I think they have different strengths, and I'll be interested to see how good Fnatic are with Oscar playing again. But yeah, I think these two teams are very close, and I think they're both not like a full level that I would put them in B tier. I don't expect either of them to make it out of Swiss stage, but I think they're both like decently, like a good bit ahead of BDS. I think there's going to be some teams between Mad and BDS, I think, on this list. I think Fnatic in particular, Mad have the potential to be extremely volatile in a bad way, and we've seen that at Worlds before from Mad, and potentially you could rate them lower just based on their history as an organization. But I think I'm just going to take them at face value and leave them here. Fnatic, though, I think the way they play this very sort of stable, trying to play for late game with these farming junglers, Ivan, Karthus, Talia, I think they're going to have a much better chance at beating teams that they should be beating. Like, they should be less volatile, essentially. And I think that will help them in Swiss stage. I don't think they'll get out, because to do that, you're going to need to beat some of these teams above. And I don't think they're going to be able to do that. But I think they have a much stronger chance of not disappointing than Mad do. Finally, we have G2. So these are clearly the best team in EU, like by a landslide. And their rating for me, so based on the tiers, A is like, I think they have the possibility to win Worlds, and B is, I think they're like a semis or quarters team. They should be expected to get out of Swiss, but not in the contention for winning Worlds. I think that's where they sit. I think they're probably at the top of B tier, but I could potentially change the order. We'll have to see how many teams end up in B tier. But yeah, I think G2 are going to sit in B tier. I think they should easily be beating every team below them and making it, hopefully, to the Swiss stage. So we actually have a Western team in the knockouts, and it's not just Asia Games Part 2. So yeah, G2, they look pretty good. I mean, they looked very good in season finals. They do make some mistakes, though, and I think their biggest weakness is actually their individual laning. We saw even in season finals, BB, despite playing really well in team fights, he's kind of losing lane quite hard a lot of the time, even to Wunder, who has only just come back after not playing for a while as an emergency sub. So yeah, I think their individual laning is quite suspect. We see some isolated deaths across the board sometimes, and then it always depends on what version of Caps is going to turn up. I also think they're going to, just like what happened to MSI, they're going to struggle more once they hit these stronger teams, and they can't afford to be weaker in lane, because a lot of how they play the game is they don't focus on laning so much. They try and move people around the map in pairs, form trios, and like translate pressure across the map. I think that's what they're really good at. But the teams that are better at laning than them, they're just not going to give you these windows. You're going to be so far behind in gold. And also, if you try to move away from side lanes in the mid game, they're just going to out macro you. They're going to generate massive leads, and it's going to be really hard to play. So I think that's their weakness, but if they can get that ball rolling, I think they're really good once they have got it going. Now we're moving into NA. Golden Guardians, I think they had a little bit of a miracle run at MSI. They took that game off BLG, but I don't actually think they're that good, and they're going to be my first team in F tier. They're considerably weaker than C9. I think it's weird that people are saying, I've seen people saying that Golden Guardians were the best performing NA team at MSI, even though they literally played a best of 5 against C9 and they got absolutely dicked. So I'm not really sure where that narrative's coming from. I mean, I guess they technically did better against Eastern teams because they took the game off BLG, and they maybe looked slightly more competitive. Like, did they get shit on less? Maybe? I don't know. But they're clearly worse than C9, who we'll get to later. And I don't think they have any realistic chance of beating even the teams in C tier. G2 would mop the floor with them. I don't think they're actually going to make it to the tournament. My money would be on BDS to make it to the tournament. But, you know, we'll see how that plays out. Next up from NA, we have Team Liquid. They're going right next to Golden Guardians. I think this is basically the F tier version of Fnatic and Mad. These two teams are very close in terms of their level of play. But they're not good. When I was watching the playoffs in NA, both of these teams looked horrible. Team Liquid, oh Jesus, some of the stuff they're doing is just illegal. They're basically only here because of Pioshik making some miracles happen sometimes with his Viego pentakill and stuff, but the games are so sloppy. I think NA as a region looks very, very weak, which, you know, it always has, but I think this year in particular, like this looks like a new low to me, which is impressive given that it's NA. So yeah, both of these teams slotting into F tier. I don't expect either of them to beat any of the teams above them, which is sad to say. Moving on, Cloud9, the second seed from North America. I'm going to put them between BDS and MAD. I think they should be favored against BDS. I think they should be slightly unfavored, or slightly unfavored, or potentially equal to MAD. I'm going to say maybe slightly unfavored. What C9 have going for them is Berserker. This guy's an absolute monster, and a lot of their game plan this year has been, we're going to effectively do nothing and then let Berserker carry. And that worked until they hit resistance from NRG in finals, and I think C9 also had quite a bad series overall. I don't think they are just worse than NRG. I think NRG did a really good job of figuring out how to punish them though. But yeah, if you don't let Berserker come online, C9 are not going to win. Like, that's basically all they have going for them. Unless Blabber has some miracle performance. I think their mid laner MNS is definitely the weak point of the team. I think he will get hard exposed by any of the mid laners above him, even like Humanoid, even like Niski. I think Niski's going to be able to get away with so much. Like Humanoid, I think, would individually destroy him. Niski, I think, he's not going to individually destroy him, but I think he's going to get way more opportunities to do his Niski stuff, where he like roams around the map and stuff against MNS, because there's not as much pressure on Niski from MNS. I think he's had some really suspect games. So yeah, I think that's a fair reason to put C9 below MAD. Then we have the LCS champions, NRG. And again, it's like, do I put them ahead of MAD or below MAD? I think these three teams, Fnatic, MAD, NRG, you can argue any which way you want, and to some extent even C9 as to what order you want to put them in. I think, to be honest, these 5 teams in C tier are quite close. It's like quite a close cluster. NRG obviously had a really good showing against C9 in the LCS finals. A really cool underdog story to see. They made that underdog story happen, but what I think they're lacking is individual skill. And I think this is going to get hard exploited at Worlds. This is something that there's no punish for in LCS because the individual level isn't high enough. So they can coast by on their relatively weak, like, not to take anything away from these players, they're obviously incredibly good players in the grand scheme of things, but when you're comparing it to the top of LCK, the top of LPL, the level is just not there. And whatever strategy you have, whatever game plan you have, kind of like what I'm saying about G2, but even worse, is like whatever strategies you have, they're gonna all fall apart when you're so far behind, when you're just getting smacked individually. So yeah, I think NRG, they're not that much better than C9. You have to rate them higher because they deserve to be higher. They showed that they earned it. But I think it's going to be close. If we somehow get a rematch, I also think that would be close. We'll have to see. Now we have another team with a black logo. This is D+ Kia, formerly known as Damwon. They go straight into S tier for being my favorite team. Anyone who's followed my channel for a while will know that I'm a massive Damwon simp. I think they have really cool drafts. They have for a long time. They're one of the only teams playing Aurelion Sol as well, which I love. But realistically, I'm going to put them in B tier. I think they're a very similar level to G2. I think a matchup between these teams would be really cool to see. And it's difficult because both of these teams are on an upswing. Like G2 had much shakier performances in the split and at the start of season finals than they did in like the finals of season finals. Like against Fnatic, G2 looked very crisp, very dominant. It didn't look like there was ever a chance that Fnatic were going to win that series. They did drop that one game, obviously, but it looked like they had it in the bag. But D+ as well, really strong showing. They completely crushed Hanwha Life. They wiped the floor with DRX. Showmaker is fully back. Like, the level this guy was playing at was absolutely insane. He was a monster. And I think one of the biggest problems for D+, the whole split, has been Showmaker's shaky form. He's been very burnt out. He's been very vocal about this, but man, he looked good in the regional qualifiers. So yeah, I'm gonna put Damwon above, or D plus. I'm always gonna call them Damwon because I love this team. I'm gonna put them above G2 purely because they're my favorite team, and yeah, I mean I'm slightly biased towards them, but honestly, I think these two are extremely close to each other. I think this would be a really good matchup to see. Honestly, I'm hoping we see this matchup as well because there's like the long-standing rivalry since 2019, and then obviously 2020 there was the revenge arc. So yeah, it'd be really cool to see this again. KT Rolster. This is a team that I think underperformed in playoffs in LCK. I think we saw that when they played against Hanwha Life in regionals. They just kicked them straight to the lower bracket. They were like, yeah, get out of my face. Now, part of this is that T1 came in on the upswing with Faker returning, but I still don't think T1 looked that good. T1 are still improving, and I expect them to continue to improve with Faker back. The wrist issues seem to be diminishing. I think he's played like 50 games of solo. I'll talk about T1 later. But yeah, what I want to say about KT is that I think they dropped the ball in playoffs really hard. Sorry about that if you heard that car horn. Yeah, they dropped the ball in playoffs really hard. And part of this is their gameplay, and another part is their draft. I think they kind of forgot who they were a bit. I think they were too focused on what T1 wanted to do. I think this is a very similar thing we saw with Gen G against BLG at MSI, where Gen G forgot how Gen G play, and they tried to play how BLG play. And KT had really strong performances for basically the entirety of summer. Looked like they were going to win the split. They were playing their own style. They had picks that no one else was bringing out. They just looked really good, but they didn't show that in playoffs. But despite that, the level is there. And I think that was an underperformance more than that's the level that they are. And so they're going to be my first A-tier team. I think KT have a realistic shot at winning Worlds if they play in the form that they were playing in for 90% of summer, if you just exclude summer finals. Yeah, this team has a real shot at winning Worlds. Moving on to T1, I think you have to rate them higher than KT. We all know the potential of this team. These players have made semis and then finals, MSI finals, 5 games both times. Obviously they didn't make finals in the most recent MSI, but they did take JDG to 5 games, which is not something a lot of people can say. The potential of this roster is so high that you have to include them in the tier of like has the possibility to win Worlds. Will they do it? No one knows. Probably not, but they could. And for that reason, they're here. I think also, assuming that Faker continues to improve, I think a lot of the problems they had against Gen G and LCK finals was individual performance from Faker, which, you know, coming off a wrist injury, you don't expect him to be doing that well. So, shore that up if Faker can heal, if that's the correct word. But yeah, like I said, I think he's played 50 games of solo queue in like 2 to 3 days, which is a shitload for someone with a bad wrist. So you would imagine that means his wrist is doing better. We'll have to see how he performs at Asia Games. That'll be really cool to see. But yeah, hopefully the level of T1 continues to increase. It'll massively increase the overall competition at the tournament, which is always great to see. Now we have the first seed from the LCK, and this is Gen G. And I'm putting Gen G in S tier. This might be a controversial one because of their MSI performance, but I've kind of touched on why I think it went the way that it did. I think they forgot who they were when they played against BLG. Who Gen G are is they're a team that maximize resource income. They do this by having really good lane assignments, really good understanding of macro. They'll choke you out with objective setups, and they'll play for the minion waves. Everything they do is based around minion waves. And they use this to generate a gold lead over the course of a game, and then they will smash you in a team fight. They're not JDG, who will just fight you from 5k down, and their team fighting is impeccable, and they'll just win. That's not who Gen G are. Gen G are the smart, resource-generating team. And when they play like that, I think they can beat anyone. But against BLG at MSI, they tried to play BLG's game. And they lost, because BLG are a better BLG than Gen G are. So I think if Gen G play the way that they play in LCK, which is, you know, they did it against T1, I mean, they've done it against every team in LCK, and they just look unbeatable in LCK when they play like that. If they play like that at Worlds, I think they are a favourite to win the competition. Weibo Gaming, we're into the LPL, and the LPL, I think the LPL is the favourite as regions go coming into Worlds. I think they look extremely strong. Weibo Gaming, they're my dark horse. Now, I said when I placed them, I'll talk about what tier I think they would be in, and I would put them with Dom 1 and G2, in no particular order. I think this team, they're expecting to make it out of the Swiss stage for sure. Yeah, they sit with Dom 1 and G2. I think any matches between these three teams would be really cool, especially if we can get a best of 3 between them as like a qualification match. Because you get those in Swiss stage now, that would be really cool. But why are they my dark horse? Weibo Gaming might be the most volatile team on this list. And the reason I say that is that they can beat anyone. This team can literally beat anyone, but they can also lose to anyone. They have some of the biggest ints, particularly from the Shy, but they also have some of the biggest crazy moments, also sometimes from the Shy. And they're the only team in the world with a positive win record against JDG. They are 4-1 in game score against JDG, which just goes to prove the point. Like, they can beat anyone. So, maybe I would even put them in A tier, just their volatility bumps them above these teams, but I think their realistic level is like here. But yeah, they're going in my dark horse tier, because I think, you know, if they just have a good series and then another good series and then another good series, if they just turn up 3 series in a row, they could just win Worlds, because they can beat anyone in a series. If the right version of them turns up, they could also lose to anyone. You know, they could somehow find themselves in a best of 3 against like Fnatic to qualify for Swiss, and they just lose it. You know, it's entirely possible. Weibo could lose to literally anyone. They could also beat anyone, so they're my dark horse to win the tournament. Now we have LNG, the 3rd seed, which I think is doing them a bit of injustice. It's just the way championship points works, but they're clearly the 2nd best team in the LPL rather. And I'm actually going to put them ahead of Gen G. I think this team is really fucking good. Their mid jungle, I think, is the best in the world. Scout and Tarzan, like, they're incredible. Their early gameplay is crazy. They will generate leads against pretty much every team in the world, if not every team in the world. Yeah, and they just use that to snowball. I think they have really good understanding of draft. I think they were drafting really well in LPL finals. This team's just really strong. They played 2 series against JDG in LPL playoffs, 5 games both times. Their wins weren't shaky either. Like, they had convincing wins over JDG. This team is really, really strong, extremely dangerous, and one of my favorites to win the tournament. Now we've got BLG. This is the 2nd seed, but performed worse than LNG over the summer playoffs, but had a very good summer season. You definitely can't discount this team. The problem with this team is that they cannot beat JDG, ever. They just keep getting smacked by them. And one of the funniest timelines would be if the finals is somehow BLG versus JDG, and BLG finally overcome their demons and win. But I'm going to put these at the top of A tier. I think that of all the teams that I think are like next in line after the favorites to win Worlds, I think they're at the top of that list. They have really solid players across the board. Bin, I think, is in contention for best top laner in the world. Elk, especially if we can see long-range carries like Jinx and Zeri come back. Zeri's already come back to some extent. I think Elk is an incredible player, especially on those types of champions. So yeah, I think BLG, they're the most likely of the less likely but still possible to win Worlds candidates. So they're going at the top of A tier for me. Which leaves us finally with JDG. Everyone knows their name. They haven't lost a best of 5 series all year. They won MSI. They won LPL. They are looking to complete the Golden Road, which no one's ever done before, and I think they are the favourites to win the tournament. There's not a lot to say about JDG other than I think 369 is somewhat overrated. By that, I do by no means mean that he's a bad player. I think that people just assume that because he's on the best team, he's like dicking everyone in lane and he's this ultra dominant top laner. He's not. He's really, really good. He's the best weak side top laner. And not necessarily weak side, sometimes they can play through top, but the style of champion he plays, it's Cassante, it's Gragas, it's Ornn, it's, you know, these types of Scion. It's always these types of champions where he's playing for team fights, he's playing around his carries. And don't get me wrong, there's no questioning that is the correct way for him to play, because his carries are Knight and Ruler. Like, Knight is he's in contention for best mid in the world. I think it's like Knight, Scout, and Chovy are the three in contention. And Ruler, I don't think there's any question. Ruler is the best player in the world. He's unbelievable. Just everything. Laning, positioning, team fighting. His usage of his defensive tools is immaculate. He'll hold on to summoner spells and like Xayah ults and things in just way longer than anyone else, using them at exactly the right moment. He's always playing those fights on the edge, squeezing out every point of damage. I do think, obviously this is the Donmon fan in me coming out, but I do think Deft is the closest there is to him. Like, Deft might be the second best ADC in the world. If you go and watch his performance over LCK, it's been absolutely crazy. He shattered the damage per minute record, but enough about simping for Donmon. Yeah, JGG, they're the tournament favourites, and there's not too much more to say. If we end up in a meta where big top lane carries like Camille, if we end up in like Camille, Jax, Fiora, you know, Yone, like if these sort of champions become extremely prevalent, then I think JDG get worse, because that's not how they want to play the game. But for now, stable top laners like Cassante, amazing. Renekton, amazing. Ornn, solid. Scion, solid. Gragas, solid. You know, unless there's a big meta shakeup, I think they're definitively the favourites to win. So yeah, that's my tier list. I'd love to see in the comments if you would move any teams around and where you would place them. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm looking forward to making more content leading up to Worlds. The draft reviews will continue once I start streaming again. I'm not home at the moment, but I will be soon-ish. So yeah, see you next time. Bye.